In this box is something so extraordinary, so revolutionary, that you may not have had enough time to actually process how important this product actually is. And I didn't have enough time to actually realize that until this thing landed on my desk. Because when I first heard of the announcement of the M2 Mac Mini, I just had this initial thought of, okay, here is a new Mac Mini that they just swapped out the M1 for the M2 chip in, and they dropped it by $100. The old M1 Mac Mini was great. This new M2 Mac Mini is going to be great. It's kind of like a boring product. Okay, let's move on. But the more time that I've now had this Mac Mini, the more time that it's been sitting here, the more I've been using it, the more I've been looking at that price point, the more it's made me realize how important this computer actually is and how exciting such a boring product turned out to be. Because this M2 Mac Mini looks exactly the same as the M1 Mac Mini. In fact, this is actually the M1 Mac Mini. My M2 Mac Mini is still hooked up to my desktop. I didn't want to unplug it to bring it over here, so I was like, oh, I'll just use the M1 Mac Mini as a prop because it looks exactly the same. So you even get the same USB-A ports, the same two Thunderbolt ports, the same HDMI port, the same Ethernet port. The only thing that's really changed here from a feature set besides the M2 chip is that the new M2 Mac Mini now gets Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. So you're getting better connectivity for the Wi-Fi. If you have a Wi-Fi 6E router, you're going to get faster wireless speeds. And then the Bluetooth 5.3 might actually be a good thing for the Mac Mini, because on my old M1 Mac Mini, or this one that's right here, I had some Bluetooth dropouts occasionally. So I'm hoping that with the enhanced Bluetooth, that's going to be a thing of the past. And obviously, we're going to have to spend a lot more time with the M2 Mac Mini because that didn't start popping up on my older Mac Mini until I started using it for like a month or so. But this new M2 Mac Mini has those upgrades in it. It doesn't even get like the newer HDMI 2.1 port, which the M2 Pro Mac Mini has, that can drive an 8K display. So it doesn't even have that. So that's basically all the new stuff, besides the M2 chip. Now, there's a surprise with this M2 chip. It's kind of not a surprise. Like, you probably should have been expecting this. But the M2 chip in this Mac Mini, if you're getting the base model, which is the version I got, you're going to get slower SSD speeds than what you even got on the base model M1 Mac Mini. But unlike the M2 MacBook Air, where that was like a big controversy, I don't think that same logic applies here to the Mini. The reason why that was such a big controversy on the M2 MacBook Air was because Apple did a complete redesign for that product and then charged $200 more for lesser specs. This time around, Apple has kept the same exact design, and they actually dropped the price of this by $100, so it's now $599. So when you consider that, and you're like, okay, they dropped the price by, $100 and the SSD speed slower, it's not really a big deal, right? It's like, okay, well, this is still like an incredible value. And honestly, if you're like really looking at it, for the price point, the SSD drive in this Mac is still incredibly fast. Like 1500 read and write speeds is not slow. It's not like you have like a spinning hard drive disk, and there's even much slower SSD speeds on the market. I frequently work with external drives that only hit around 1000 read or write speed. So this is still not a slow SSD drive. If someone's telling you not to buy it based on the disk speed drive itself, I think they're being foolish, because just based on this price point alone, you're not going to find a better computer for $599. So listen, I don't want to do like a whole benchmark video on this, because I feel like I kind of already did that when I did the M2 MacBook Pro specs and started doing all the benchmarks for that. Listen, the M2 chip inside of this is going to perform very similarly to the M2 MacBook Pro that had an active cooling system. This M2 Mac Mini does too. It has a fan inside of it. I don't think there's any chance that this thing is going to thermal throttle or heat up, because it's such a big enclosure. It's got a dedicated fan in there. So really, the M2 chip is going to run at peak performance inside of the Mac Mini. But there is one thing I do want to point out with a benchmark. I want to use it as an example for this video. And that is, if you take a look at these Geekbench scores, this is a $599 Mac Mini, and this is and Apple still sells this, a $5,999 Mac Pro. Yeah, the $599 computer right here is faster than that $6,000 Mac Pro. And that is true. It is faster in CPU performance than that machine. And what that translates to the everyday user is that in the Mac lineup, at least on Apple Silicon, we are at a point where these benchmarks, these speed tests for the average everyday user, they don't matter. They don't matter. The M2 chip, if you're opening up an app, it's going to open that up like almost instantly. You're not going to run into a lot of just general slowdowns or any slowdowns really when you're just doing general computing. If you're browsing the web in Safari or on Chrome, if you're doing any sort of word processing, if you're, doing spreadsheets, doing presentations in Keynote or PowerPoint, all the basic computer tasks, taking notes, all that basic stuff, right? It doesn't matter on this machine. Don't think about performance. It's gonna get the job done, no matter what. It's gonna get the job done. We are beyond that point. And this is an entry-level computer. We are beyond that point. What you really need to ask yourself is, do you do anything that goes beyond the basic? Do you video edit? Do you do any development? Do you code? Do you do any, photography editing? And that's where maybe you'll start to value more speed and more power. With this base level model, it can kind of do a lot of those things. It can definitely video edit. I don't know about 3D modeling. I have no experience with that. It can definitely video edit though. And really, this represents to me one of the best values if you are a creative, if you are doing something that does require that processing power, which used to be a pretty big kind of hurdle to overcome. I remember when I first started doing YouTube videos on this channel, I went out and bought a 2013 21-inch iMac. And I'm gonna be honest with you, like there was times where that computer was so slow at doing things, I would just kind of have to like walk away from it and let it like process or load something. And I just wish that this option, I paid $1,300 for that iMac for a really slow experience. I wish there was something like this M2 Mac Mini when I first started. It would have made my life so much easier starting out. I would have had to face so much less hurdles creatively that I could have just focused on my work. I could have just left the technical hurdles behind and just really focused on the stuff that I wanted to make. So even with the slower 256 gigabyte drive, even with just 8 gigabytes of base memory, I was able to edit the video you're watching now. I'm recording this in the future, and I did the full video edit on this machine with very minor slowdowns, very little hiccups. Now, could I get my job done on this 8 gigabyte machine? Yes. Would it be more pleasant to work with 16 gigabytes of memory or more storage space on the hard drive? Of course it would be. And that's why I make the recommendation that you gotta spec this out based on your budget. My recommendation to you, if you're any sort of creative professional, would be to spec this out to 16 gigabytes of memory. My advice to you would be to get a hard drive that's bigger than 256 gigabytes, especially if you're not working with external drives, because those are going to fill up really quickly. And that's kind of the thing, right? Like you can spec this out to be a very competent creative machine. You can go up to 24 gigabytes of memory. You can get a 2 terabyte hard drive in here. But if you're watching this video and going, my budget doesn't allow that. Let's just say that. You're going, my budget doesn't allow that. Maybe you walk into the Apple store, you only got $600 to spend. Hey, maybe you're a student, you only got $500 to spend, and you just came back from watching this video and you said, you know what, Greg said, if you can get 16 gigabytes of memory, get it. If you can get a 512 gigabyte hard drive, get it. But you just can't. It doesn't matter. This at $599 is going to be the best possible computer you can buy. Am I making the advice that creative professionals get these higher end specs? Yes. But it doesn't matter if you can't get it, because this is still the best option. You're not gonna walk in to buy like a desktop PC and then expect like similar performance. You're not gonna walk in and buy like an older Intel like Mac that has like 16 gigabytes of memory and expect better performance. It's not gonna happen. I don't think it's gonna happen, at least. Maybe you could prove me wrong, but this at $599 is really the best possible value in all of desktop computing. And that's what makes this thing so great. It just enables all of that creativity, and you really kind of don't have to worry about it if you can't afford those higher end tiers, because this is gonna still be the best possible option. Now, are there things I don't like about the Mac Mini experience? Yes, and this is coming from like a privilege area that I was pretty used to the Mac Studio. So when I first went to set this up, and it was telling me, okay, you gotta plug in your keyboard and your trackpad. Well, instinctively on my Mac Studio, I would just plug that into the front USB-C port. Well, this Mac Mini doesn't have a front USB-C port, so I had to reach in the back and use up one of the very limited 2 Thunderbolt ports to plug my keyboard and mouse into this. And then other things, like when I went to go import footage into this, well, I had to use some sort of dongle or adapter. There was no SD card slot on the front. So there are things I would change with this Mac Mini design that I think would make it a better computer, that I think wouldn't be too expensive for Apple to add like ports on the front like they did with the Mac Studio. That was actually a really good move. But if you're asking me, is there a better value in computing out there right now that's going to be the best performance possible at the cheapest price point possible? It doesn't exist. This is it. This is it. And this is just really such an amazing computer. It's better than a $6,000 Mac Pro. And that's kind of insane to think about. So yes, the M2 Mac Mini is in fact insane, and it's just a really good computer. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's a great computer. If you can make this work for you, and you don't need to be portable, if you work at a desktop, just buy it.